You probably know as subcommittees do have special remits, and our remit is the internal market, infrastructure and employment. And last year, during the course of last year, we scrutinised quite a lot of propositions dealing with research and innovation. We decided for a short report, because we had done the Women in Boards last year, that we would actually go for this one, innovation and research, or research and innovation. And it turned out to be very interesting. I personally was slightly worried about it because not being a very scientific or technical person, but it did actually show really that there was a need to get our act together, both in this country and particularly if we're going to connect with Europe and for the easy running of the internal market. So we started, and we are publishing on the 30th of April, and there are quite a good number of conclusions, and we think we've done well to open up the whole subject, because there's a lot of mystique about it, the whole subject about what does it really mean, how do people get over the problems of research into who funds it, into a particular project, who funds it, what's the benefit going to be, does it need European money, and then particularly in the area of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, because they're a very important part of the European get back to the decent economic running of the European Union. Because something like 98% of businesses in the whole of the European Union are actually small and so that's my number. It's incredible. So that's what we did. So yes, we came to certain conclusions that we thought were fairly important to highlight the problems, because if you know what the problems are, and you can then see whether there's a chance for the whole problem to be solved. And unfortunately, we have on our committee people with a lot of business experience, and we also had two people who were extremely involved in research, one on business research and the other on medical research. So they were able to bring to the party, if you like, all their experiences. And then we had terrific witnesses, which the clerk and the policy analyst had drummed up out of the ether. But it's amazing people who are in this country and doing fantastic work that most of us don't know anything about. Well, it was just by taking evidence. And then one of the bright sparks, well, they're all bright sparks in my committee, when the bright spark says, this just doesn't make sense. What about the American experience? And I'll say it as simply as I can. The process is that the European Union sets out an invitation for people to approach them to get money for research and innovation. So they in turn have to produce projects, and they do an enormous amount behind the scenes and in their own research laboratories, etc. But the time between the last date that you can apply for one of these grants and the actual granting of the money for the research has on average been 499 days, whereas in the United States it was about a third of that. In fact, I have that, yes, the average is between 150 and 180 days. So there's obviously something that's clogging up the wheels of it. Now, it's not our job to declog the wheels, but actually to put this into the public domain and say, hoi, this is, and what's the European Union going to do it? Bureaucracy does get, well, when you've got 27 member states and each one is sort of got its own ideas, it is inevitable, I think, except the Americans have actually 52 states. So, but I think we can learn from them. Not always can we learn from them, but on this one we can. And we need some, to use that ridiculous expression, some welly behind it. Well, I think it was the processes of evaluation, impact assessment, which is very important, I'll come back to that in a moment, monitoring and the evaluation and research. It's not just the point of getting the money from the European Union for the grant. And gradually we're now trying to get impact assessments made for every project that we look at. In other words, saying what's going to happen if we put this money into this particular area, invest here, and the results come out in 3 or 4 years. Is it going to actually match the expectations of increasing growth? increasing also particularly jobs, giving more employment, and particularly youth, of course. And very often, nobody looks at it after 3 years to see, did we actually achieve it? And of course, in business, if you did that, you'd find, well, perhaps we shouldn't have built a big bridge there, and we should have had 2 small bridges somewhere else. I'm just making a hypothetical, giving a hypothetical example. So we are very strong in saying that everything we do should be re-evaluated within a specific time. Now, sometimes research times for a project are very long, so you've got to make it clear that they really ought to be looking at it stage by stage. And then, of course, you might come to the end of it and say, well, doing that particular research has made us realise that project Y, which we haven't touched, and then can piggyback on the back of that and use the research for that. It's a highly complicated thing, but actually it's basically common sense. So I think that was the process. There are always processes. Instead of having 5 people, if you want to write a letter, somebody writes the letter, somebody writes the envelope, somebody puts the stamp on the envelope, somebody goes to the post office. I mean, that is being absurd, but you can see the points, and that is not the best use of people's talents and time. And just to try and stand back a bit and say, have a look at the processes you're going through. Well, it's being published on the 30th of April, and I hope that the press office, and I hope things like YouTube, will give us all a great boost. And I hope that we will have some formula, we haven't had it yet, where we could go back to our witnesses and say, we'll obviously send them a copy of it, say, how about this, and what do you think about this, and can you keep us informed on how things are going, and whether we can actually use our good offices with the European Commission and do it for the better both of the 27 member states, but particularly for strengthening our negotiating position for additional funds for research and innovation.